The holidays are here at the Home Depot, so let's get to decorating. Find your perfect tree in our huge assortment of shapes, sizes, and styles. Like the easy-to-assemble Jackson Noble fir, with pre-lit branches perfect for styling with all your favorite ornaments. Or the Flock Starry Light Fraser fir, with over 1,900 pre-lit memory wire branches that keep their shape so it's ready right out of the box. Ooh. Find the perfect tree now at the Home Depot.
She said, get out the chat room and clean mine. Stretch, feeling fine, so fresh.
The Glad Girl Group coming at you with a throwback jam. That was Glad Force Flex Drawstring Trash Bags featuring Pine Sol Original Scent. And that's better than all good. It's all Glad.
This podcast is brought to you by Kleenex Lotion Tissues. You can't predict sick days, but with Kleenex Lotion Tissues, you can be better prepared for them while helping keep your skin healthy. Kleenex Lotion Tissues moisturize to help prevent skin irritation while you're battling those unwanted cold and flu symptoms. It's extra care when you need it most. Keep relief within reach. Grab Kleenex Lotion Tissues to help avoid the added discomfort of irritated skin during cold and flu season. For whatever happens next, grab Kleenex.
Welcome to the Putback on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, your host, and we're going to be breaking things down, Knicks, NBA, for the next 30-plus minutes. And we got two great guests with us today. We've got my friend Jeff J. Says. Follow him there on Twitter. And you know for Jeff that he is an on-air talent, analyst with TNT Sports, and a KFS Casual Friday host. So you can catch him on many platforms. And we also have ESPN's Tim MacMahon, a fantastic reporter and the author of an upcoming book on Luka Doncic called The Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness, that comes out on March 25th. But with Knicks Mavs coming up tomorrow night, we figured it's a good time to get Tim on the show, talk about the book, talk about some current events. So we're going to get started here with the baseline. But before we do that, be sure to keep your questions coming in the replies, and we'll get to those later in the show. For the baseline, OG Anunoby, I mean, just fantastic the last night, in a huge bounce-back win for the Knicks. He had 40 points. He was very good on defense, and he really, the Knicks doing a great job against Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets, coming off a really bad loss to the Utah Jazz. Jalen Brunson, a career-high assists against the Nuggets there. So, you know, if nothing else, we've learned about this team so far that they can bounce back after a loss. I believe they are 6-1 after a loss. So, Jeff, you first, man. What's your take on where the Knicks are right now?
Well, I think if you want to nitpick some losses that they shouldn't have, they probably should have a couple more wins than they do. But I think looking at their history and how they've started slow, you have to be happy that they're 3 games above 500 and they're starting to figure out their offense. This is a team that, by cleaning the glass metrics, are number 1 in offensive rating. They're in positive point differential. And this is all without everybody clicking on all cylinders. Jalen Brunson was trying to find his form early. Now he's rounding into it. And Mikal Bridges is still trying to find that jumper, the mad scientist, working on a way to calibrate his jumper beyond 22 feet, but still is able to be effective in the mid-range. So with given everything that they have, and oh, by the way, this is a team that just got together. They have a whole lot of new moving parts. You have to be pleased with what you've seen offensively from them and the potential. It seems like every time I watch them, their ceiling just continues to raise. And once Mikal Bridges gets into form and has some type of consistency, we could be looking at one of the best offenses in NBA history by rating.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking about starting to figure out their offense. Every time I look, they're scoring 125, 130, 145 points. I mean, Towns has absolutely been lighting it up. It's funny, you don't think you're going to say this with a Tibbs team, but the question is can this team be good enough defensively to put the Knicks in a position where they are a real threat to the juggernaut that is the Boston Celtics and this Cleveland team that has only lost 1 game. offensively, they are absolutely sensational.
Yeah, Karl Towns, fastest in Knick history to 400 points, 200 rebounds. Tim, when this trade happened before training camp, what were your initial thoughts, and do they match what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you knew that Towns was going to come in there and just give them a completely different dynamic on the offensive end. And I thought that it might take a little bit of time for the Brunson Cat chemistry to develop, but I thought that Brunson was going to benefit big time from having a big who could space the floor like he does. And then, honestly, my initial thought was, is it going to go better with Tibbs and Cat this time around? It didn't go great in Minnesota. And Cat was a young guy then, and I don't think he was nearly as mature as he is now. But Tibbs wasn't able to build a respectable defense with Cat as the anchor back then. I still think that's a huge challenge. And I think a big part of that puzzle has not played a second for the Knicks this season. And obviously I'm talking about Mitchell Robinson. So once they get Robinson back, how much is Cat going to play alongside him? How much are their minutes going to be staggered? I know that Tibbs wants to play his starters 45 minutes a game, even if they're blowing out the Nuggets by like 30 points. But I don't think we're going to know the potential of this team on the defensive end of the floor until Robinson's not only back, but able to kind of get his legs under him.
Yeah, I'm with you, Tim. And I do think that Robinson, obviously, initially is going to come off the bench, but the Knicks do want to see Towns and Robinson share the court and see what that looks like if and when Robinson returns. He's been progressing in his rehab, so you still expect him back sometime in that late December or January window. And yeah, I think the Knicks are curious about that Robinson Towns front court. And Jeff, Tim mentions the defense. How much of that is a concern for you based on what you've seen?
It's a concern. I won't go into major because with the Tibbs teams in the Knicks era, we've given them 20 games. You see it after 20 games, Tibbs figures out what's the blips versus what's the trends, and then starts to make his adjustments. I do think if you told me that Mikal Bridges was going to be one of the problems on defense, I would have lost a lot of money. I would have lost a whole lot of money on that bet, right? But this is one of those things where if you look at numbers and you feel like there's going to be regression, if he regresses back to the mean, which is an above average defender, that may clean up a lot of the defensive missteps that you see them going through. A lot of it is also, it's funny Tim mentioned that we have an embarrassment of riches on offense. I mean, OG Anunoby right now, he's morphed into ultimate universe, alternate reality, British Kawhi Leonard, right? On offense. If you told me he was going to be the third option, he actually looks like the third option that they traded 4 first-round picks and a pick swap for. Mm-hmm. This is what he's rounding into. 27 years old, stepping into his prime. And shout out to the new medical staff that the Knicks have hired because he looks fresh. Yes, I gasp and spit the rosary every time he hits the ground. But this is a guy who, if he can develop right now, if he was to just remain average, doesn't go too high, doesn't go too low, do what he's doing right now, he would have, per StatHead Basketball Reference, he would be having a regular season on par with 3 Steph Curry seasons, including the unanimous MVP season, because, of course, and Ray Allen, which is more comparable due to his 3-point attempts. So I look at, these are guys that have the IQ where you put them on the court and they just run plays. If you ever play pickup ball and 5 guys who don't know each other all of a sudden start running like they're the 96 Bulls, you wonder how did that happen? That's the type of IQ they have. We need to see that IQ, a few of those IQ points, not a lot, just a little bit. Get it on the defensive end, clean up your rotations and do all of that. And if they can get to average, now you're talking about a shootout. Tim, with the New York Knicks, you're getting into a shootout with the New York Knicks. These aren't your father's Knicks. These might be your grandfather's Knicks, because I know they were scoring a lot of points in the 60s and 70s. So this is a change for the modern Knicks fan to see. And I'm not going to lie, I love rooting for offense, especially when it's my team. I haven't gotten a chance to experience this ever as a Knicks fan. This type of beautiful game offense. I like what I'm seeing. So I just need them to adjust the defense to get it to respectable levels.
You think Tibbs loves coaching shootouts? You think Tibbs is like, oh, this is great, man. Woo, games in the 120s, 130s, 140s. and you nailed it with Bridges, though. You give up 5 first-round picks for Bridges, not because you think he's going to be an awesome offensive player. You think he's going to be better than he's been to this point. But, hey, as a third option, a fourth option, he's a really good offensive player throughout the course of his career. But you're trading for Bridges because, forget about above average, this is a guy who's been in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. You're trading for him to pair with OG Anunoby and give you, what should be the best wing tandem on the defensive end of the floor in the entire NBA. And then you can protect Brunson. Once you trade for Cat, you can kind of mask some of his deficiencies. So, whether Bridges' jumper gets ironed out or whatever the case may be, we'll see what happens there. The expectation is that he is an absolute elite defensive player, and that's not asking too much. We've seen it throughout the course of his career.
Jeff, you mentioned Tim's grandfather's Knicks. I think, Tim, your grandfather, didn't he fight in the Civil War? The Civil War vet. So I don't know what his area would be.
He was a New Yorker. I was born in Terrytown. I don't know if I've told you.
Really? Home of the Knicks practice facility.
Like Conte sauce. I was made in New York, but I got to Texas as soon as possible.
Oh man, so I want to hit you on Casey Smith. Jeff brought up a great point about the health executive the Knicks hired from the Mavs. We'll get into that a little bit later. Right now, it is time for a segment that we like to call What We Learned. What We Learned, presented by Binghamton University. Binghamton University was named the top recent rankings from the Wall Street Journal, top school in the SUNY system, according to recent rankings from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. You visit binghamton.edu for more. And what we learned, I think, throughout the whole portion of this early season is that OG Anunoby contract, I think, is going to look very normal in a few years as the CBA keeps climbing. I know a lot of people had sticker shock when they saw that deal. Anunoby obviously getting $200+ million from the Knicks, the biggest contract in Knick history. I know there's a little bit of shock, but you look at what he's done. I think he's been the most consistent Knick. And the interesting thing to me is you go back to when he agreed to that deal. It was not a fait accompli, right? It wasn't definite that he was going to sign with the Knicks. I think it got a little bumpy there in the negotiations in the 11th hour. Obviously, they ultimately get the deal done, but there's a world where, things go sideways and he ends up in Philadelphia, and that changes everything for the Knicks. But fortunately for New York, he's here, he's healthy, and he's playing incredibly well. So I've seen the best of OG Anunoby so far. And Tim, I want to get into Mavs Knicks history because there's so much of it, and I know you got into it in your book about Luka Doncic. I know you got into the Brunson Dallas dynamic. And what did you learn in your reporting for the book about what went down or the aftermath of Jalen Brunson and the Mavs divorce?
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff that is pretty obvious. And the number one thing you know going in and is reinforced, Mark Cuban's full of crap. My favorite thing is Cuban's insistence of, we would have outbid the Knicks. We had no idea what the number is. They wouldn't tell us the number. It's like, did you lose your internet connection? It was widely reported. I reported, and I wasn't alone, days in advance of free agency that it was going to be 4 years in excess of $100 million. It ended up being $104 million, obviously. And, the interesting thing, Rick Brunson, this will shock you to know, but Rick Brunson was awfully chatty. We had coffee at a Starbucks in Dallas when they came through last year. And, the one thing that Rick said is they thought when the Mavericks scheduled that meeting that because at that point, there's only one way the Mavericks can salvage the situation. And that is, sorry, Jalen, here is a couple of Brinks trucks. We're backing it up for you. Come on, let's make the decision difficult. They thought Cuban was going to come up there and throw a max deal on the table, which they would have been killed for, and it would have aged well, right? Just like the Knicks, honestly, were killed for 4 years, 104. And man, did that age well. And Rick says that Jalen looked at him and basically said, if it's that, I've got to take it. And Rick was like, yeah, you do. Absolutely. Well, we can buy a house in Dallas. But obviously that situation didn't play out that way. And, it's interesting. And this is the world of what ifs. But I am convinced that if Jalen Brunson would have re-signed in Dallas, whether it was on the extension the Mavericks were way too late in offering, or, if they'd have decided, okay, we can't just let him go to New York. We've got to, throw the max on the table and make him make a difficult decision. I think he would have ended up in New York anyway. I just think it would have been on the other side of the bridge. I think he would have ended up being traded for Kyrie Irving. Just because, listen, the Mavericks never, or at least Mark Cuban, never looked at Jalen Brunson as a legitimate star. And he's not alone in that. He wasn't necessarily a proven star. He's just a guy who got better and better and better and better. Certainly looked like a star in the playoffs that year. But once Kyrie became available, I don't think that that the Mavericks would have been able to pass on the chance to add that level of star. So I think Brunson would have ended up with the Brooklyn Nets had he have returned to Dallas.
That's fascinating. And I think that would have driven Knicks brass nuts because they targeted Jalen for a long time. So maybe the Knicks then end up trading for Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges at some point with Sean Marks. But the what ifs are fascinating to me, Tim. Do you know ultimately in that Mavs Jalen Brunson meeting, was there a number put out there? What was the conversation like at that point?
So the meeting was called off, but the number that had been discussed was "quote unquote" Fred VanVleet money, which at the time was $21 million a year.
Yeah.
And so 5 years, 105 versus 4 years, 104. Like, come on, it's not as Rick Brunson said, make me make a hard decision. That's not a hard decision. That's common sense. But it's funny. Again, Fred VanVleet money was the line in the sand, just like Mike Bibby money was the line in the sand on Steve Nash back in the day.
Oh, wow. How about that for a parallel?
Yes. Steve Nash, who was brought up, by the way, in the post-draft introductory press conference when Jalen Brunson's sitting right there. And it wasn't brought up because of Jalen Brunson. It was brought up because he was represented by Bill Duffy, who repped Luka Doncic, who was sitting right there. And Donnie Nelson made the awkward, uncomfortable, in hindsight, jab at Mark Cuban joke. Hey, Bill, let's make sure this one stays in a Mavericks uniform. And by the way, Donnie also gave a shout out in that press conference to Jalen Brunson's agent, a pretty accomplished dude named Leon Rose, who, by the way, in that contract negotiated that the last year would be, the language in the last year would make Brunson unrestricted going into year 4. So that, the Mavericks didn't have the right to match because of some semantics in the contract negotiated by the guy who ended up bringing Brunson to New York, and obviously has known him since he was a newborn baby.
So many dots to connect, both here in New York and over there in Dallas. And Jeff, for you, what was your initial thought? I'm just curious, and you could be honest. Your initial thought on the Knicks trading off their veterans to create the cap space to sign Brunson, basically being all in on Brunson that summer.
I hope it works.
Yeah,
because that was the number one thing that I had, and they asked for the trust, and they asked for fans to trust in the front office. And what I saw them building so far, I said, okay, you have a personal relationship with this dude. Is this going to be the type of nepotism where your cousin isn't really qualified, but you're going to get him a job, or they are qualified, but they just need the opportunity? And we see that it was more so the latter. It's funny listening to Tim, and I definitely want to tap into the book to hear what the spin is on losing Brunson. The object of your affection becomes more attractive when other people desire it. But when you're talking about people, they have the right to say, you should have liked me when I was hot, when I wasn't hot. Now I'm hot. They all on me, right? So it's just hilarious how it gets spun to that where, and Tim, you could correct me if I'm wrong, Brunson approached them with the idea to extend or to work on a deal, and they said hold off. And now I'm thinking about it. Are you upset that he left? Or are you upset that you couldn't use him in a trade package later on down the line?
Well, and there's no question about that, especially if the extension, the max extension for him was 4 years, 55 and change, 4 years, call it 56 rounding up, which, are you kidding me? What an unbelievable trade chip that would be. And, Rick Brunson talked to me about when they go on their vacation to Jamaica, where Jalen's mom's family is from. They go there every summer. And that summer going into that, they're like, oh man, $56 million. They thought it was happening. Mm-hmm. And again, Rick Brunson's perspective, a guy who grinded for every nickel he made in the NBA, 9 years in the league, never had a guaranteed dime, not 1 minute on a guaranteed contract. So we're taking this. He said he even would have, if they'd have given him a little discount, 4 years for 50, which is hilarious. And the Mavericks were like, hold off. And, it was a new coach. It was a new GM. But really, ultimately, it was Mark Cuban. And Cuban thought going into that season that there wasn't going to be much of a market for Brunson. He thought it was going to be more of a mid-level type of market, which was, 4 years, a little bit more than $40 million at the time. He was only wrong by about $60 million. But, hey, and then they went back to him, though. It was the weird, coming out of the bubble COVID season, mm-hmm. and the Mavericks had a COVID outbreak. Luka, was reported out of shape. They shut him down for a little bit with some ankle stuff. Then he got COVID. Brunson kept the Mavericks' head above water during that whole time, established himself, went from a six-man to a starter, and they went back to the Mavericks in early January and said, hey, we said we weren't going to negotiate during the season, but if you put it on the table now, we'll sign it. No. And the reason it was no then is the same reason they didn't offer Dorian Finney-Smith the same identical deal until right after the trade deadline, right? Mm-hmm. If you extend them at that point, you can't include them in a deal before the trade deadline. And they were, who's going to be the co-star next to Luka? Who's going to be the co-star next to Luka? Which is another way of saying we don't think this guy's capable, right? And then obviously Brunson, again, every year of his career continuing in New York, he's gotten better and better and better. And the first time you really kind of looked at him and said, maybe he is legitimately that co-star, is the first round of those playoffs. Luka's nursing a calf strain for those first few games, and the guy goes for 41 and 31 against the Jazz, and off they go. He's the second best player on a team that went to the West Finals. And so, but they still, the criticism of the Knicks was it was an overpay. I remember looking at the contract then and looking at the starting point guard contracts in the league, and it was about right in the middle. And my thought was Brunson's going to be a top 10 starting point guard. And I was pretty confident of that. So I didn't think it was a bad contract. I didn't think he was going to be fifth on an MVP voting a couple years later. Mm-hmm. By the way, neither did Brunson, neither did his dad, neither did Leon Rose, neither did Tibbs. The guy just keeps exceeding expectations.
Yeah, the continued improvement is really remarkable. And even this season where you're seeing him with the people around him distribute the ball more and still get his shots, get his points. But, his assist numbers have been fantastic. Most recently last night, setting that career high in that win in Denver. And I'm curious, though, one last thing, Tim, on Dallas. Casey Smith, the impact that he had on that organization. What do the Knicks get in Casey?
Yeah, and honestly, it was pretty shocking when essentially he got fired before last season. He was on the payroll, but he was no longer part of the organization. And this is a guy who had been not just Jason Kidd's right-hand man, but going back years and years, basically 2 decades in Dallas, a Team USA trainer, a guy who is immensely respected throughout the league. And, for whatever reason, the front office and Casey got on different pages. But I promise you, when Casey became available, it didn't take long for Brunson to reach out to his godfather and say, this is a guy that we need to get in New York. And he's phenomenal at his job. I don't think you're going to find somebody who's more respected in the world of athletic training, certainly in NBA circles. And he can be an extension of the coaching staff and of the front office. I mean, Casey would be qualified to work in a front office, just forget about the health and player player performance stuff. And Rick Carlisle used to say, hey, if I gave Casey the clipboard, he could coach an NBA game. And again, the relationship with players. Brunson's certainly an example of that, but far from the only example. For example, Dirk Nowitzki would tell you Casey Smith's one of his best friends in the world. And he kept Dirk upright until he was 40, and then the wheels. At some point, it doesn't matter how much, it doesn't matter what kind of science you have, unless it's Frankenstein type stuff. The wheels fell off when he was 40.
Right. Well, I know that also there were several teams that were interested in Casey before he agreed to come to New York. So if you listen to Tim, it was a shrewd move by the Knicks. Jeff, I want to get your take on some of the X's and O's stuff that we're seeing, but Tim's out of here in a minute or two. So Tim, one last one with you. With the, December 15th, still a few weeks away, what are the Mavericks' needs and where do you think things go in terms of the trade deadline?
Yeah, I don't know that the Mavericks have a glaring need. The thing that the Mavericks really need is to have their MVP candidate back. And I'm not just talking about back from injury. Luka's nursing a little wrist sprain right now. Luka hadn't played at an MVP level yet this season. He'll be the first one to acknowledge that. And this whole thing is built and based on having one of the best players in basketball at the center of it. But they've done a nice job filling out the roster. Guys like Najee Marshall is really playing well. Dante Exum will be back at some point, and I think Dante will.
The holidays are here at the Home Depot, so let's get to decorating. Find your perfect tree in our huge assortment of shapes, sizes, and styles. Like the easy-to-assemble Jackson Noble fir, with pre-lit branches perfect for styling with all your favorite ornaments. Or the Flock Starry Light Fraser fir, with over 1,900 pre-lit memory wire branches that keep their shape so it's ready right out of the box. Ooh. Find the perfect tree now at the Home Depot.
Address what might be their biggest need, and that is just on-ball perimeter defense. I'm not telling you the Mavericks won't make a deal. I'm just saying that there's not a glaring need like there was last year when they were like, hey, we've got to upgrade the power forward position. And, they brought in PJ Washington, and certainly, he accomplished that and their season turned around.
Sure. Yeah, they did some great work last year, trading and otherwise. And they turned, to me, they haven't corrected that Jalen Brunson mistake, but they've done pretty well. Someone else has done pretty well is Tim MacMahon in his book on Luka Doncic. We're very excited to read it. It comes out March 25th. The Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness. Tim, fantastic reporter. It was fantastic to have you with us. We appreciate it, and we hope to see you soon.
Always a pleasure. Adios, amigos.
All right, Tim.
So, Jeff, I want to get into some of the Knicks stuff that we're seeing recently. The 45 assists. I mean, just a monster number from the Knicks. I think it did match a franchise record. I think it was November 79 that they had 49 assists. So, anyhow, is this a Tom Thibodeau shift for you, Jeff? Is that what you see here? Is he changing it all, or is this just a team with incredible offensive talent?
I think it's a little bit of both. Jamal Crawford, who's been really dope in the analyst chair at MSG Networks, he had mentioned that this isn't the first time that Tibbs has had a top offense while he was coaching. I want to say the Derrick Rose MVP season might have been one where they were at the top of the league. So I think he's one of those guys that can do more with less, but when you give him more, he can do more with it. And I think you got to give a tip of the cap to the personnel that they have. They have shot makers. They have incredible offensive talent. They have high IQ offensive players who can get together, run the offense, and score at an amazing clip. One of the reasons why the loss of the offensive rebounding isn't really being felt right now is because they're making more shots. It's hard to get offensive rebounds when you're making shots. So I don't think this is a schematic change as much as it's the personnel. You can see a lot of dynamic offense that the Knicks are running where they're initiating more motion, backdoor cuts, Spain pick and roll. They're running a modern NBA offense, but it's hard to see that same type of execution when you don't have the shot makers. And now they do. You got a guy like Josh Hart, who our guy Kaz called the Carmelo Anthony of Draymond Greens. And I say he Josh Hart's like no one has Josh Harted in the history of Josh Hart's, because he is just a dude who eschews the spreadsheets and the analytics to where, yeah, it can tell you a story, but your eyes have to complete it. And he is the ultimate glue guy, somebody who just disrupts enough throughout the game that's going to give you that heart. He gives you that mental edge. He can get a triple-double at will. All of a sudden, he can hit shots. I think I heard somebody say he turns into Michael Jordan with less than 5 seconds on the shot clock. But he can hit these shots too. And in the post games, you've been there, Ian. He'll even say, I choose to play this way because I want to get everybody else involved. I know I can hit shots if I want to. And yeah, It annoys me so much when he pump fakes on those open 3-point shots to drive to find the better shot, where sometimes I'm like, Josh, just shoot. And then Josh takes an off balance fadeaway 2 with 1.5 seconds on the shot clock and it's all net. So I let that man do what he does. He told the fan base, I'm going to do one bonehead thing every game. Just let me have that. And I said, I will concede it if it's just in the first half. If it's in the first half, I don't care. Get it out your system. Throw the ball into the 200 section. I don't care. But I to answer your question, to put a bow on it, Ian, when you have the offensive players who can run, like you got here's something for you, Ian, that blew my mind. They're shooting above 40% on above the break threes. This isn't just corner 22 feet shots that they're cashing. Cat is in the 96 percentage and OG's in the 92 percentage per cleaning the glass in percentage across the league of hitting above the break threes. So this is a team who's getting their offense in a variety of ways. While there's been much maligned about Mikal's jump shot, he is the mid-range messiah right now. DeMar DeRozan might be passing the torch onto him for the mid-range. And that excites me because, Ian, these are the type of shots you need to hit in the playoffs. Yes. So if he's hitting playoff shots now, I won't be as worried. If his range is exactly 22 feet, he has to figure that out. But I don't have any worry. I think he's going to round into form. But I do think when you give a coach the players and you're able to see how they can really coach when they coach players who are optimal at those positions. And you're seeing it right now.
Yeah, and to Tom Thibodeau's credit, I mean, there are so many choices he has to make throughout a game, including who to close with. And, those choices get scrutinized when you lose. And I don't think they're easy decisions to make. They're certainly not as easy as, a guy like me who's sitting on the outside thinks it is. And he's gotten a lot right so far. And Mike Malone had a pretty strong quote out there after the game last night. He said, I hope for all the Tibbs haters out there who say he doesn't coach offense, really appreciate offensively they are elite. And that's coming from a great head coach in Michael Malone. There are, I think, the early season kind of adjustments that they go through. I think you're still seeing some of that, but I think a lot of that stuff has been worked out on the offensive end. And it's impressive that they're at this point, this early in the season. Yeah, I thought to myself, maybe, December 1, you take a look at where you are, and maybe that gives you an inkling on what the team is capable of. But they've been, above and beyond offensively many nights. The one thing is, I think this team, you looked at the Utah game, thought that, their inability to hit shots impacted their ability to defend. And if you want to be a championship level team, that can't happen. I've talked about it a lot, sacrificing for the greater good. And that's everybody on the roster, right? That's everybody. Anunoby, Bridges, Brunson, Towns, Hart, everyone. Sacrificing for the greater good and not letting what happens on offense dictate what you do on defense. So maybe that's one thing to keep an eye on moving forward. But that and health, I think, could derail this team. But right now you're looking at a very, very strong NBA offense. We want to get into some injury updates. And Jeff, for you, was it good to see some of those injured bodies back on the floor last night? I know we had Deuce McBride back.
Yeah, it was great to see Deuce, especially playing in back-to-back games where the total elevation was like 10,000 plus feet between the cities in Utah and Denver. Those are the type of games where I think you need to use as much of your personnel as possible. One of the things amongst everything with Utah was definitely a flush it game, but I did think that even if they might not have been as effective, you may have been buying your team more time if you would have ran with Kolek and Dadier and Huck Porty more, just to give everybody else a breather, because it's one thing to come back from 15 plus points, 17 plus points down. It's another to do it in that altitude. And I know people say it may sound like an excuse. Take it from somebody who the first time I ever went to Denver, I landed and I was like, oh, this elevation thing, this is in everybody's head. I don't feel any different. I went to go work out, went on a treadmill, and then ended up with a nosebleed. My nose doesn't bleed. Like I don't ever end up with a nosebleed. And then I had to respect it. And then breathing in the air when you're not used to it, it is different. Cleanest air I breathed in the US. They're in probably Portland, but Denver, it's crisp and it's thin, right? So you have to account for that. And I think, like you said, another thing about this team is that they have to be able to feed off of what the bench gives them. And I think with Deuce and Cam Bain, who's probably all NBA, I hate him if he's not on my team, Cam Payne, and not just for like attitude and stuff like that. I love his attitude, but it's like you see Cam Payne celebrating and it's against you, and you just want your team to annihilate him. But when he's one of your guys, that's when he's celebrating. He's somebody who's coming in and he's getting an A from me, because that light might be a little too emerald green at times, but at least he's not scared. He's playing on defense. Him and Jericho Sims and OG were one of the key catalysts for that 17-0 run, because they were playing defense. So that next level is to have those starters be able to feed off of their bench and lock in on defense. And I think when you have somebody like Deuce who can score even better, he's elevated his game offensively every year and his defense hasn't waned. Those are the type of players you need to give a change of pace, because if they're going to lean towards, I don't want to say finesse, because that gives that euphemistic that they're soft. Not so much that, but it's not hard-nosed offense. This is prestige offense, right? This is prestige offense. You need a change of pace. So you get that last year gritty defense with the second unit. And if you need a pickup either way, the team needs to be able to feed off of each other and off that energy. That's the next echelon that they need to get into, along with cleaning up their defensive schemes. But seeing Deuce on the court, hearing the positive news you'll get into on Precious, even with Mitch, these are the type of moves to me where these are your mid-season acquisitions. It's just getting your personnel back. And then once everybody's back, you get a clearer picture on the real possibility your team has for ultimate success. So I love Deuce. I think he's going to be a fringe six man of the year candidate. I love seeing him back. And even if he wasn't shooting the ball well, he was playing well, which is like one of the Tibbs core axioms. So I love to see that in action.
Yeah, you know your Tibbs-isms.
You got to. The game tells you what to do, Ian. The game tells you what to do.
Rush the pass. Yeah, yep. I've heard them all, and many times. And sometimes they're used even when the question has nothing to do with that topic. It's Tibbs goes for that. To not answer what you're looking for, which is a skill of itself. But let's run through the injury updates. We talked about Deuce. Mitchell Robinson. Tom Thibodeau told reporters on the road that he's still in that rehabilitation mode. Nothing much new to report there, although you hear no setbacks, and that's good news. I think that late December, January timetable still is where it's viewed right now for Mitchell Robinson and Precious Achiuwa. Strong news there. Tom Thibodeau again telling guys on the West Coast that Precious has returned to practice, has done some contact. I would assume they don't rush him back. I would assume that he's going to have to do some work, conditioning to get back on the court. Maybe it takes a week or a few days before he can actually be ready to play in an NBA game. You got to see how the hamstring responds, but he's in a good place, so they should have him back shortly. And then Landry Shamet. Nothing concrete there other than no news is good news. And I do think, once he gets all the way back, I do think the Knicks will strongly consider re-signing him. And then you maybe bring Matt Ryan on to a two-way deal. We'll see how that shakes out. Cam Payne saying last week that Landry's looking good and he's getting better. So positive injury news for the Knicks. Jeff Johnson, for you, Knicks, Mavs, tomorrow night. What are you looking for? What do you expect?
Consistency. That's my key right now. Keep the energy the same as you did in Denver. I understand. The Knicks right now have a team that's really acclimated to West Coast basketball, from Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, Cat. These are guys that played in the West Coast. So these games they get up for. So I'm leaning on that. And also to build upon the offensive play that they've had before. Yeah, this is something that is elite already, but don't settle for just elite. Try to get as close to perfect as possible. You're not going to reach it, but with each step, you're going to be more successful. I want to see them continue to keep it up on offense, like don't fall back. And defense is where I'm really looking towards them. It is even, I'm not looking for them to be lockdown defenders and everybody be a defensive player of the year candidate. I'm looking for a decrease in the mental mistakes. I'm looking for you to hit your rotation. You're running out to the 3-point line. Get your hand up. You said it before, Ian. Don't let offensive stagnation affect your defensive play. It's about effort. And I know Cat has had a lot of criticism on him for his defense and then this season. But one thing I can say is he does try. It's more of a technique thing. It's the little push afterwards that doesn't really affect the shot, but they're going to call it because it looks like it, because you're 7 foot and you're shoving people. It's just the way it looks, right? Don't get discouraged that you're not getting a whistle. And I understand it. I'm not a hashtag refs guy, but it is kind of crazy to see Cat barrel down the towards the rim over and over and over again, receive contact, not get a call. Brunson, we already know what it is. He's adopted Carmelo Anthony. We don't get those type of calls when you're driving. If he had a headband, it probably would be crooked at some point in time. But hopefully that adjusts. But you can't even let that affect you. You got to keep playing. Go play for the N1s, even if you're not getting them. I'm looking for the bench to continue to step up. The name of the game for me is consistency, and to go in against a team that doesn't have an all-world, all-MVP, all NBA first-team MVP candidate and handle business. The Mavs haven't been pushovers, but they have been inconsistent. You know, they give up leads. They'll give you the opportunities to win. So take that opportunity.
Yeah, no Luka Doncic. Obviously, you still have to deal with the rest of the Mavericks, including Kyrie Irving, homecoming for Jalen Brunson. The Knicks have a pretty good opportunity to finish out this road trip, their longest of the season, 4-1. They have Dallas, and then they finish this thing out Friday against Charlotte. And we are finishing this thing out. Jeff Johnson, we really appreciate your time, man. You could catch Jeff, on-air talent and analyst with TNT Sports and the KFS Casual Friday host. And you can catch us here on the Putback next December 4th. That is our next episode. We'll be talking Knicks and getting a little closer to trade season, so we'll probably get into some of that. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
The holidays are here at the Home Depot, so let's get to decorating. Find your perfect tree in our huge assortment of shapes, sizes, and styles. Like the easy-to-assemble Jackson Noble Fir, with pre-lit branches perfect for styling with all your favorite ornaments. Or the Flock Starry Light Fraser Fir, with over 1,900 pre-lit memory wire branches that keep their shape so it's ready right out of the box. Ooh. Find the perfect tree now at the Home Depot.